There we go.
Great. So welcome to our community call on sustainable business models for retreat centers. Glad that you could all make it and have this time set aside. This is a space for peers to learn from and with each other. And lucky us, we actually have some partners that are supporting us in the learning that we're doing with peers. So we get to learn from them and with them as we explore these models at retreat centers. So it's my pleasure to introduce the Cal Poly student research team, Jenna Vokolek, Alyza Jose, and Yumi Aguilar, who are here with us to share about their research. I've invited them to do just a short introduction of themselves because for many of us, this is only the second time we're chatting with them, or maybe even just the first time. They presented to us back in February, but they've made some progress on their research and have more to share today. And maybe this is the first time that you've heard about this study, and so you don't know them. So I'd encourage them to each give just a short introduction about yourselves, how you're coming to this work with retreat centers. And I'll pass it off to you.
Hello, everyone. My name's Alyza Jose. I am a industrial engineering student here at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Just very excited to update you guys on our project. And yeah, thank you all for being here with us.
I'm sorry. Okay, hi, my name's Yumi Aguilar. I'm also an industrial engineering student here at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. We're just very excited to have you all here, and we've been doing this work for I think 8 months now, and we're just very excited to show you, and I really love being on this project.
And then I'm Jenna Vokolek. I am a manufacturing engineer at Cal Poly, and I'm also very excited to be here and to share our findings and what we've been working on for the last few months. And yeah.
That screen share going to work, Alyza? I'm here to help if it's not.
Are you able to see my screen?
Yeah.
All right, so I guess we will get started if that's cool with everyone. Yeah. All right, so to start with just a really quick overview of what the project is. We're working with y'all, the RCC Club, the RCC network. As you all know, like the network of retreat centers across the United States and Canada. And we're working with 8 participating centers across the US and Canada with a representative of, which is representative of the spread of religious affiliation across the greater network. Since through the pandemic, many centers shifted to day retreats or fully virtual programming, but for the scope of this project, we were focusing on in-person retreat centers that provide overnight stays. And our main objective is to help retreat centers break even while also maintaining their unique and very important visions.
So each retreat center has its unique mission, as you all may know, and something that we recognize based on our in-person and virtual visits is a common denominator of providing a place and the resources for spiritual transformation or spiritual healing. But because of the lack of infrastructure that promotes financial feasibility, the goals for this project were to identify and quantify the most influential variables that impact retreat centers' financial performance and sustainability. Also improve ongoing financial visibility and develop operational and programmatic models to help retreat center reach long-term sustainability and profitability.
So for this project, we were looking at 4 different areas like performance metrics. The first was client satisfaction. So how satisfied retreat center leaders are in utilizing the tools and recommendations that we give. Financial status. Are we successful in helping retreat centers get their revenues greater than our expenses and allowing for some money to be put aside for larger projects or unexpected hurdles? Process improvement, so how much time is saved by the retreat center employees to produce the same or better results by the use of the calculator we've developed, and also increase accuracy. We also wanted to decrease the amount of loss by finding the areas of operations that are creating loss and finding ways to help you find a way to break even or find other operations that can cover the loss.
To start off, like what we started working on back in, I think it was October, we completed a literature review. So basically researching different subjects within this project. It focused on 3 different topics, which is the wellness tourism industry, sustainable cost models, and third operations management. And each one we found some very important information. So within the wellness tourism industry, we found that this is the industry that retreat centers fall in under. And from our research, we found that this industry is actually having a predicted growth of 9.8% over the next year. And that was from a study by the Global Wellness Institute. With this projected growth in the industry, it's just really important now to ensure that retreat centers are sustainable within their operations and financial models, just so they can thrive as this industry grows. In terms of sustainable cost models, the thing that we were mostly focusing on was something called blended value accounting, otherwise known as the triple bottom line. And that's a way to make sure that there's a way to measure the monetary, social, and economic output, as well as the impact generated by retreat centers to find the best way for them to be sustainable. It's also a good way to help us find ways that you can drive decisions for your centers by directly comparing the social and the economic impact of your decisions. And then in terms of operations management, that's a way to find the this is in the context of retreat centers, right? So it's a way to make sure that you're achieving maintenance and keeping facilities running within certain levels of staffing, as well as keeping an eye on different variables such as those listed on the screen. Example, cost, expenses, accommodation capacity. And then also finding what these distinct characteristics of what drives each retreat center. Our team will focus on identifying a financial model, if it exists, that is sustainable and programmatic to aid retreat center leaders with important decision making.
So when brainstorming possible causes of not meeting the break-even point for most centers, we've identified elements such as shortage of employees and a change in the market or group of people to whom a center can offer their services and programs to. In addition, true costs are often unknown. For example, despite having high-resolution data, it's often difficult for the finance team to distinguish which factors or essential features are contributing to the operating expenses. And finally, some centers fail to break even because there's no current standard model, as mentioned earlier, that all retreat centers can follow to ensure financial feasibility.
All right, so moving on to the current data analysis, excuse me. So the highest cost we saw by far was payroll. As you can see to the right in the chart that we generated, it is vastly above all of the others in terms of costs. And that's followed by miscellaneous costs. So all of the costs that vary from center to center that you can't necessarily peg down the specific thing is just, you know, the secret sauce of each retreat center. And then follows groundskeeping maintenance, then lodging and housekeeping, then food and kitchen costs or like the baker costs. And then there's a few like marketing, cost use land, site rentals, program costs that exist, but they weren't occupying any considerable amount of the cost. The revenue was split almost equally between program revenue, rental revenue, retreat revenue, and then donations and grant revenue. There's about 25, 25, 25, 25 split between those. And then the average annual deficit of the forest centers that were running deficits, there was one outlier that was running over 100% deficit that was excluded, is operating at an 18.7% loss. So obviously not great. But 3 centers that we looked at are currently financially sustainable with about a 8.2% profit. And then overall, between all 8 of the centers, excluding the one, so 7 centers, there's a 7.21% annual deficit on average over all of the centers. And then we've highlighted 3 of the most significant categories where costs are highest or revenue isn't as high as it could be. I'm going to say talking about the solution directions as we'll explain more in detail in best practices about the possible solutions. So I'm just going to go down just what the categories are basically. So as I said, payroll is significantly high with about 25 to 75% of the costs coming exclusively from payroll. And then program revenue isn't being utilized to its full extent. It's less than 50% of the revenue comes from programs from centers. And then lodging housekeeping is another significant cost that is about 15 to 30% of the total cost. And also the centers, and this is in terms of the impact, centers that serve underserved communities, so cancer help programs, racial healing initiatives, stuff like that. They want to keep their costs low for accessibility. And a possible solution for that is to have more profitable, less mission-driven revenue streams, such as corporate retreats or hosting weddings, to cover the costs they'd be losing on those programs. Utilizing cross-subsidization, which is something we looked into in our literature review. It's basically the idea that you're doing things that aren't 100% in line with their mission to help financially support them. So an example of museum gift shops, they're selling the goods so that they can make money to run their museum, right? So that's kind of that general idea. A key takeaway is that running out your center for corporate retreats or weddings doesn't necessarily detract from your mission. It just allows you to keep on providing the rest and healing that people need. And additionally, program expenses are a barrier for some. So keeping program costs down, funds available for scholarship is necessary for equal opportunity, which is an additional financial burden on retreat centers, which again, that is why the solutions like corporate retreats might be a solution.
Oh, sorry. To go along with our data analysis, we also completed a best practice analysis. This was our way to go through qualitative methods that were not represented through a quantitative financial data analysis. The way we like to think about it is if a retreat center director were to start fresh or build a brand new center, what should they keep in mind? We were looking into several questions, and one that was a big one was, is there a one-size-fits-all model that all retreat centers can follow? And after completing our analysis and looking through the different variables, it turns out that since due to large variation across all center missions and how they run, there is no one-size-fits-all model. However, to still help you with financial decision-making in all of the retreat centers, we decided to shift into developing tools for you to help make your financial decisions while keeping everything in mind.
So even though there's no universal model because of the variations in retreat centers, our team developed tools like the calculator tool and the best practices manual that can be used together and provide retreat centers with recommendations based on specific characteristics. The calculator tool mainly highlights influential factors and takes into account retreat center characteristics such as size, age of the center, number of staff, and so on. The best practices manual, on the other hand, is organized by categories, and which you will see later. And it provides both data-driven and research-based recommendations for centers. Just a short description of the calculator tool. It's an Excel file, which was designed to display or illustrate financial data, and it acts as a tangible tool for retreat centers to use. The steps are as follows. I'm not gonna read through it, but it's very simple and it shouldn't be too difficult to follow. Just basically just inputting numbers from your financial report on one sheet, and then on the next Excel sheet, you will see the output and some data visualizations. We will go over a demo for this later. Here's an example on the input sheet of the calculator tool. On the top, you have the costs, and then the middle, you have revenue, and then the bottom, some very basic characteristics that are unique to your center. On the green, that's where you will be inputting your values. And this is the calculator to output sheet. You have some graphs that visualizes your expenses and revenues. Then up on the top, the values are sorted, whether it be for expenses or revenues.
All right, so for our best practices manual, we're just going to start with a quick overview. We'll be going into each section individually in more detail. But we found 4 major areas that could use improvement. So those would be the foundation, programming, payroll, and accommodations. Each one has is branching into 2 or 3 different specific areas that we'll be going over. So in terms of foundation, there were 3 different areas: mission, religious affiliation, and location. To note religious affiliation, this was the question we were answering, but there was no effect on financial sustainability. There are similar deficits regardless of the religious affiliation of a center. So that was just put in there to make sure that people are aware that religious affiliation isn't something you need to worry about at all. In terms of mission, this was looking at if someone were to start new, or maybe rebuilding their statements, of looking at the impact versus a vague or a specific mission statement. We found that vague mission statements allow more flexibility in your programming due to since with your nonprofit status, you do have to follow a mission. So a vague mission statement will allow you to be more flexible. However, we also understood that a specific statement also allows for much better center identity and like this feeling of like, you know what your mission is and you know who you're serving. So it was kind of exploring the pros and cons of each of those 2. And then in terms of location, location is very variable across all centers, but things that we're looking at were what kind of competition do you have to look at while you're planning your while you're advertising and marketing your programming, as well as for a brand new center to consider, would you consider working with the U.S. National Park Service? Because they can assist you with land maintenance, but however, they do provide limitations on what programming and what kind of construction on your site could be done, since it would be considered a form of protected land. So things, if let's say a center were moving or if a center were starting over, that's what location, or starting new, I mean, that's what location would be most important for. And then in terms of payroll, as we highlighted earlier, payroll was significantly the highest cost across all centers. So for payroll, we tried to implement some solution ideas that can reduce costs without you needing to reduce payroll to pay your staff and your administration. So that could do things like working with local community organizations or groups such as like Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, or like college service groups to offset staff costs, things for your housekeeping, your groundskeeping, your maintenance programs. And then for using for more of your administrative payroll that you may be paying people, we were considering asking if you would consider using accommodations as pay. So that would mean having administrative staff live on site or utilize some of the services that your retreat center offers. And that basically is a way to offset administrative costs while still providing equivalent pay. It's kind of like how some administration, and we were looking at like college administration, some of them are paid like a living fee, like they get to there's a place for them to live near campus and they're given maybe a vehicle, and that's part of their paycheck, and that's they quantify that in a way to make sure that it is equivalent to what is normal pay for that kind of position.
All right, and then moving on to accommodations. So there is no ideal bed count. A retreat center with more than 100 or more than 200 beds has the same percent loss as one with less than 50 beds. If considering corporate retreats, private restrooms / bedrooms are strongly encouraged, just because of the nature of, you know, corporate people don't necessarily want to be sharing, and they might pass up on you if you don't have private restrooms and bathrooms. Additionally, post-pandemic, there's more of a push for less communal accommodations. Obviously, this is a big change, and it is not feasible for most centers. But if you're in a situation in which you're doing renovations, or in a situation in which a new retreat center is springing up, this is a very good thing to keep in mind. For housekeeping, decrease housekeeping costs, encouraging longer term stays for less turndowns. So like providing longer stay discounts, for example, would be a good incentive, because like I said before, the housekeeping costs are one of the higher costs. And then programming, all of the revenue generating centers utilize youth directed programming. So implementing youth-directed programming will increase the revenue and financial stability of your retreat center. Then corporate retreats, as I've mentioned before, are a large underutilized demographic that are willing and able to pay high prices needed to offset the cost to better serve the underserved community. I was looking into it a little bit. It would take about 5 overnight corporate retreats, like of an average corporate retreat size, a year to offset the average deficit I was mentioning before, or about 35-day retreats. Of course, that's like a kind of an iffy number because it depends on how big they are, but just on average, that would be about it, how many it would take. And then centers should serve underserved communities for their mission on general, and the corporate retreats or renting out the center for events like weddings will allow for extra money to offset subsidizing the cost for them to attend. And now let's pause for reflection.
All right. A lot of material there, and I see a lot of good questions in the chat. Alyza, can we stop sharing screen for just a couple minutes? Thank you. There's all those faces. Hello, everyone. I'm not sure how much time we want to spend in discussion right away, but I know that before we do any discussion, it would be good to do just a little more reflection of all that material that was just presented. For some of you, you might be holding questions in your head and they're kind of swirling. Others have written them in the chat. Maybe you've jotted some down on your note paper. I'd encourage folks to take just a minute or two here to journal, to kind of pause. What does this bring up for you? What concerns, what ideas, what opportunities is this pointing toward? What was missed? What was the question that you expected them to mention that didn't get mentioned? All those things so that we can kind of catch that and it doesn't affect the next part of the conversation where we'd like to be able to hear from each other and share and exchange. So a few 2 minutes here to just allow you to jot down your notes and kind of catch your breath. And then we'll come back in with some Q&A where we can kind of voice some of that or go through some of the things that are in the chat as well. While you're taking some notes, if you haven't had a chance to review the chat, I encourage you to peek in there. A lot of great questions. And a lot of support for the work you're doing. Students, thank you for your work. So grateful. So let's maybe shift to a Q&A. Alyza, Yumi, Jenna, how many more minutes would you like for your presentation on the tool and the best practices? Because I want to make sure we hold time for that. 15?
Probably 10, 15, because we also would probably want to have time for questions about the tool specifically.
Yeah.
For questions, I see a few about the tool in the chat. We'll be doing a demo after this Q&A. So we'll hopefully answer your questions there. If not, we'll also address them after we do the demo.
So let's maybe take 10 minutes now for Q&A. And I don't know if we should start with the chat or not. If there are pieces in the chat that you won't cover in your tool overview, maybe we can go right into those now. I also share many of the questions that are in the chat, so it's hard for me to choose just one. I'll start with the simple one. Will you be providing the PowerPoint afterwards? Erin said that we'll have it and we can share. So we can put that in the blog post. It'll be linked in the blog post, which will be up in about a week, which will be on our website. So you'll be able to jump in and download the whole deck on Google Slides.
And Ben, if you don't mind me saying something, this is Tali, and I just want to introduce myself. I'm going to introduce myself formally in the chat. I am the professor who advised the team, not that they needed that much advising, but I will have my contact information for later in the chat.
Awesome, thank you. Do you guys want to pick and choose some of the questions that you feel are most relevant?
I did find one that I think it's a clarification question. Someone asked I think it was about what youth-directed programming means. So youth-directed programming is I guess programming that is directed at like youth interests. So an example of one that we saw in our research as well as our data analysis was a center was utilizing like a Dungeons and Dragons retreat thing. And many college and high school aged youth were very interested in that. So that would be utilized. So basically, in more like general terms, youth-directed programming would probably be more like utilizing pop culture. So things like movies, music, games that is currently popular, things like Dungeons and Dragons or like other types of board games that folks maybe in younger people may be interested in. So it's really looking at the audience and seeing what draws them in and then implementing that into your work. So it could be something like healing through music, healing through playing, like having joy and playing games together, things like that.
It does not specifically mean having the youth lead the programs, but having programs that are aimed at their participation. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then another question I saw in the chat that kind of a clarification question. It was like how differentiate programs from retreats. So the way we are classifying that is that programs are just kind of like, like day things, right? Versus retreats it's like programming plus overnight.
There is a question about the calculator tool. I think they were asking about the color coding and then the criteria behind it. We will go over that after this discussion. There is another question about the annual revenues of the 8 participating groups. I think on the calculator tool, we actually have the max min, and I believe the average for the costs and the revenue. So I think you'll also see that later.
To answer the question about per square foot or per guest night maintenance housekeeping costs, unfortunately, we were unable to do that as we did not have enough data about how many guests were there per night or how many which rooms were occupied at what times. It just wasn't feasible with the data that we had. However, we were able just to get an overall annual housekeeping or maintenance costs throughout the each center that we worked with.
I just want to say one thing before I leave. I have to leave the meeting because I have a faculty meeting in just starting in a minute. I want to say that one thing that wasn't mentioned in the recommendations is that perhaps retreat centers can leverage universities nearby, because these students did it as a senior project. And so they got the academic credit for it. And we're getting the results of, we all are getting the results of their analysis work. And there may be, so for example, we have manufacturing engineering students. Jenna is actually a manufacturing engineering student, and that can do design work and construction work in retreat centers that are reasonably close. We fly to places. We've flown students to Seattle and to Phoenix to do projects. So this is not an unheard of idea, using students and they get academic credit. Okay, sorry, thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Tali. Thank you.
As we're going through the chat, would it be possible for folks to maybe react to the questions that they would like answered most, just to make sure that we hit those ones? Let me check out what these are here. So I'm reading. It looks like we did collect data about food costs. We have a food and kitchen category that we looked at, which combined kitchen utility as well as food resource that you were utilizing.
Yeah, and then in terms of the difference of self-generated programming versus renting space, there wasn't anything conclusive from the data that we could necessarily pull. Like I said before, it was kind of like a quarter split between them, like in terms of just like out of all of the centers, how it split up. But yeah, like some of the retreat centers that were doing well had like a ton of rentals over retreats, and then other ones it was the other way around. So it wasn't anything super conclusive on that.
I see Nancy's comment about benchmarks, that some of these questions, it might be helpful to have common definitions. And it's making me wonder how we can build on the data that you've already collected and some of the insights that you've gathered for our next community survey, which we'll put out to this group later this summer or early fall. And if there are certain benchmarks that seem relevant across the diversity of center models. So that's a question that's on my mind. We're actually drafting maybe a pre-survey that we can put out to centers to say, which benchmarks are you looking for, or who are you benchmarking yourself against? Who do you consider to be your center's peers? So looking forward to exploring that a little further as the year goes on, and to the work that you've done, students kind of helping us move forward in continuing the conversation. We can spend another 2 minutes here on Q&A if there are other folks that want to pipe in with a question, can do that verbally too.
Ben and students, just I wrote a note, 2 notes really, and someone else put in one around corporate retreats as a potential unrelated business income, but volunteers in California, you have guidance that you're very limited in terms of using volunteers for things that would normally be paid positions. So how you use volunteers is very restricted in one sense, in terms of really balancing what are truly needed services that you would normally be paying for. So that's one thing. The other, as I looked at how you have food showing up as an expense and food and labor related to food, it looks to me like it's way low in terms of the overall percentage, and our experience is much higher as a proportion for the overall expense to run the operation. And it could be a fact, I don't know if it's a regional factor, but hard to say. I mean, food costs have gone up astronomically in the last year and a half.
In terms of food, we did find that the food costs did very much vary across the different centers. The centers we worked with were all over the place. So I guess in terms of comparing the percentage of or the cost of food to the other things, you were like payroll and like housekeeping maintenance, food still remain lower than those costs across all centers. While we did see that it fluctuated based off of each center, we of course also didn't have historical data to look at in terms of this, but in terms of the 2022-2023 fiscal year, food costs, while probably a higher percentage than normal, was not still did not surpass the other ones.
I think the other thing that the team really challenged those of us that participated in the study to do was to think about our costs in a way that we typically don't. We usually don't have the time to do that. So, they can only go from the data we've given them, but I know it's given us pause to think about how we collect data and how we look at things going forward, just like we were talking about benchmarking. Some of that may be work that we need to do as retreat centers in terms of how we report, record, look at our costs. And this may have been a good challenge to us.
I see more questions in the chat, but let's maybe pause here and we'll do another Q&A after we give the students a chance to give a presentation on the tool and the calculator tool and the best practices. So we'll transition again back to presentation.
Jenna, did you want to speak
Yeah,
to
sure.
this one?
Bog down in the questions. Yeah, so just before we start out, just like a brief little overview on how to use the calculator tool and the best practices manual. So first off, just input the financial report items into the financial data section. Talked earlier, it's in it's all the highlighted green. Yeah, we'll show it in just a second. Then input the characteristic data. So like there's like number of beds, age of center in the characteristics section. And then you proceed to the following page with the rank costs and revenue and categories to look at it. And then it'll give you it'll tell you like what demographics you fall into. And then that will lead you to the best practices manual that will be set up according to those demographics to give you the recommendations that apply to you specifically.
All right.
Right, so I think,
So
Eliza,
yeah.
am I gonna narrate what you're doing? Is that what we decided to do?
Yes, I
All
will
right.
be inputting values from, or an example would be like a financial report. So I'll be inputting
Mhm.
them on these green boxes.
Gotcha. All right, so our financial data section is split into two different sections. We have the costs or expenses and the revenue for a fiscal year. We're split into cost is split into 8 major categories, and revenue is split into, I believe, 4 or 5 major categories. We are working on developing a example financial report that you can see which things in those categories, which items would fit in different categories. So you would input all of this information into the green sections that Eliza's entering in right now. There's a description as well as a max, min, median, average that we have developed over that is based off of the 8 center data that we were analyzing. That's just a way for you to compare your current cost or revenue to what was seen in the study. In the MISC info, that's what we're using for a categorical section. So entering the number of beds total you have on your site, the age of your center, size of your staff, your volunteer, and your occupancy levels. So that's a way for us, that's a way that those are the things that we use to categorize your center so that you can then use these categories to utilize the best practice manual more effectively, since we did have to split it up based off of categories due to large variation. So that's basically what the front page is. So then this is our output section. There's 4 different areas. So first is just totaling your expenses, revenue, and then the difference. So just a way for you to know how you're doing in general. And then we have sorted both your expenses and your revenues. For expenses, red is that it's very high, while green is that it's very low. It's sorted from highest to lowest. So you can see which which expense is causing the most impact on your total expense. And then for revenue, it is also highest to lowest. However, highest is green and lowest is red. So you can see which revenues are doing very well and which revenues may need some improvement on. And then on the underneath that, we have the expenses and revenues graph just to put all the information in a visual form. So you can see on a bar basically which ones are higher and lower based off of your current financial data. And then if you can go back up to the categories. So in categories, that is based off, again, the little section at the bottom of the inputs page. And that'll categorize your center as small, medium, or large. It'll put you into an age category. I think we have under 10, 10 to 50, 50 to 100, then 100 plus. And that will affect different things like deferred maintenance or just the basic maintenance on your buildings. That will provide recommendations in our manual. We'll see for in terms of your volunteer usage, it will show a level of what your paid staff will look like. So you can look at if you have a medium, high, or low paid staff. And then finally, your occupancy levels. So there'll be different recommendations based off of these categories that show up in the category section. So that's just the basic overview of what the tool is. I see a question in the chat about consider the age of center. So that's basically age of center would correlate directly to what types of maintenance or groundskeeping would have to be done on your site. So that's why age of center was considered in this calculation. Yeah, that's it. Our best practices tool isn't fully formatted. Our manual isn't fully formatted, but that'll it'll be organized by that once it is completed formatting. I see several questions. This is very good. Let me see. Heating, cooling, electricity, we had fall under house, what was it? Lodging, or it basically fell under which category that heating, cooling, electricity would fall under. So heating, cooling, electricity, in terms of lodging utility would fall under the lodging section. if other people want to look at questions as well.
You define occupancy anywhere?
Yes. Under the miscellaneous box in our input sheet, we have the occupancy level of the average over the specific year that you're inputting from. So for the example, it's just 40%.
But does that take into account the building, the center being used on a given day? Does it account for the number of people? If it's a group that's here for a week, do you define how to calculate the occupancy numbers?
We were going with a number of beds filled per year based off. So if you have a beds filled per retreat or beds filled per month, just basically that percentage averaged across the entire year.
So let me just ask a very simplistic question. So if you have a retreat for 5 days with 50 people, each day that's 250. Is that what you're asking? Or
sorry, can you repeat? I didn't hear part of it. Can you repeat the clarification?
If you had a retreat that was 5 days long and you had 50 people staying in the beds each night, is it 250? Or how do you?
I think it would be the percentage of beds filled per night averaged. So 50 out of your total beds.
Can I ask a related question?
Yes.
As someone who, because our center participated, so we have an occupancy definition that we use based on 500 being a max a month. So would you use our occupancy definition, or did you do a standard occupancy definition for comparing apples to apples?
If occupancy,
oh, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, yeah, if we were, some centers we didn't, yeah, we just used the occupancy percentage given to us, or we split the data analysis, but to correct me if I'm wrong, you need to analyze it, but at least the ones I analyzed, we, I just took, actually gave occupancy percentage. I just used the number calculated. Barring it made mathematical sense.
So you calculated it for us, kind of based on our logic. The example with us is we mainly have programs on weekends, and so anyway, yeah, just curious.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, maybe for the, oh, go ahead, Jenna.
Oh no, sorry. Please continue, Alyza.
Yeah, we can make clarifications on the occupancy level on our starting, I guess, a day moving forward before the academic year ends, so that we can provide you with with some more clarity on this.
Also, this tool was designed with the fact in mind that several of you have very varying situations. So occupancy level could also be adapted to, if that is necessary, can be adapted to how your center does calculate your occupancy, due to the fact that we don't want to add even more work to your plate. But the categories were dependent on the data that we did receive from the 8 centers over the study. So if that does require like a modification in the categories, then we'll definitely work on that before the academic year completes.
We can, I guess, continue with the discussion if other people have more questions, but here are our references. And yeah, thank you for listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. There were a lot of questions there around that one data point occupancy levels, but I'm sure there are many other questions in the chat as well, and probably some other questions that haven't gotten asked yet. And I want to make sure that we have time to at least capture them, even if we don't answer them today, so that the students are able to reflect on them and kind of work them into their end of their project. So if you have a question you're holding and you haven't put it in the chat, we will be saving the chat. Always encourage people to drop them in there. But we can also pivot into a verbal Q&A here as kind of an exchange. We still have another half hour in the call together. So I will hand it back to the students. You're doing great fielding all this. I love the excitement when it's like, oh, there's a lot of questions. Great, because it just makes the work better. So I'll mute again and we can continue with the Q&A here.
Hi, my name is Pam Jacobson, and I am in the process of starting a retreat center. I was very intrigued by your reference to the lands on national parks, and was curious if anyone on the call has experience with that, or if you could say more about what that looks like. Partnering with national parks.
I can chime in and say that Commonweal, located in California, is located on national park land. They have a lease that has some clauses to it that really limit what they can build and some of the activities that they can do there. But it's actually kind of an amazing arrangement in other ways, because it gives them access to an amazing coastline that they probably wouldn't be able to afford to be on anyways. And they're part of carrying forward sort of a story of how that land has been used over time. And the impact it's had on the community in different ways. So I find it very compelling. I'm employed by Commonweal in this role as program director for RCC. So I kind of know their story, but I would encourage you to reach out to people at Commonweal.
I actually have a call scheduled with them next week, so great timing. Thanks.
I'm going through the chat. I see a question from Katie about payroll across centers. If you could give a little bit more detail as to what you're asking there, just so I answer your question correctly, if you're still here.
I think just hearing more about like what I guess I didn't get a quick glance of like the max and minimum of or average about like what folks were paid and what maybe the range even at the centers was between employees.
Alyza, can you share the calculator tool front page again? See if the ranges can be up. So for payroll, it is, oh goodness, it is row 6. So as we can see, it really ranged across centers. It went from $1 million down to 31,000. There were various different models. There were some where all were getting the same salary. There were others where people were getting paid more based off their position. But there wasn't really like this does best for a center. It's more like what works better for their system, because we didn't want to tell centers like, hey, scrap your entire payroll system, because I know that's a lot. We know that's a lot to redo. I think it's looking at more like what are ways you can build in more revenue or reduce costs in other areas to fix that, especially knowing that in this day and age, it's very difficult to like pay people differently.
On average, was it like a living wage? Or did like that kind of vary too, or?
Yeah,
Yeah.
wasn't
Jenna, go.
I was gonna, for some of the centers they had like 2 full-time staff, right? And a lot of it was just like they would call in like people like, oh, they had certain individuals that they would call in like, oh, we have a big group coming in, okay, we need to you know, have somebody cook all the food, right? And they would get called in whenever they get like bigger groups, but they don't, you know, have them on hand all the time. There was a lot of situations like that where there weren't a lot of full-time employees, just a lot of part-time employees. So it's kind of hard to judge on that specifically, but
I see a question about employee benefits. That was all kind of lumped into the general payroll cost as we saw financial reports that had it all kind of listed out. We just summed that up in payroll. Again, we will be providing, once this is complete, a example financial report with what categories each item went into, so you can get a basic idea of which items go in which category.
Then to answer the question about the membership business models, we didn't really encounter those or do much research into those.
There was a question about how the 8 centers were selected. I think it was Ben who chose them that would represent the entire RCC network as a whole, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, though.
Yeah, that
It
was my
was-
intention.
It
So
was
we,
also volunteer basis, correct?
yeah, it was folks who were willing after being invited. So I invited maybe 15 or 16, and we got about 10 who responded, and a little bit of attrition, and 8 who participated. We were looking for geographic diversity, budget size diversity, and religious affiliation diversity. There were probably other markers of diversity among centers that we didn't cover, particularly whether or not they were affiliated with RCC. So we didn't reach out cold to centers we didn't know who might be further out on the fringes of the network that we formed so far. And I think there may be some newer centers who might have really new models that we don't know about yet, who also probably didn't have an opportunity to participate. So this is really about folks that we already had some trust with, that we could say, hey, can you show us your numbers? And can we put together a confidentiality agreement and do some studying on your numbers?
Yeah, I answered this question in the chat about if we're going to reveal what centers have been studied. We will not be revealing that information just to protect all their financial data. It's just an agreement that we've reached. And then I see another question about data or knowledge of corporations offering retreat stays as employee benefits. We didn't see anything like in our research on like corporations offering retreat stays, but just from personal experience. I've worked with like a organization within the college, and we did like a little like day-long like group retreat where we just went somewhere, and like it wasn't at a retreat center, but we went to like a national park area, and we did like a discussion there, and that was part of our pay for that week, basically.
Thank you.
I do see that error. I will be looking at that after this call about the land cost use.
Other questions about the tool or the best practices? I'm wondering if those made sense and landed for folks. Does that seem usable? Are there pieces of that you're still wondering if it would apply to your situation?
I'm really resonating with Eve's question about the retreat centers operating at a deficit. Like industry-wide, this seems to be an issue, right? And so I'm just, while we have this space and clearly multiple folks are navigating the same issue, I'm just, I mean, the students brought up some really interesting ideas. And I love having this platform to have these types of conversations. What comes up for people around this operating at a deficit, and where this platform can help us to share costs, minimize costs, collaborate in some way to improve the situation. Just curious what comes up for folks.
I'll share. I put the earlier comment, as Ben said, about benchmarks. I mean, I'm really excited about the notion that, and this was such an amazing piece of work. I just want to thank again all of the students and the professor. But like, I'm hopeful that that it'll give us the ability to drill down on some of our social business models. Like some of the questions that were asked in the chat that we can't really get to, like, is providing our space for hosting to other groups to do their own thing versus having our own learning programs and gatherings, shorter retreats versus longer residencies. Like I really am hungry for knowing what other retreat centers are doing and how they're doing it. And I feel like this is a basis, this is a foundation. If we agree on some of those larger ones, then we can drill down and have the conversations, because I think it's so real that I don't know. I speak for myself, as we're a very small retreat center, and I know in our history we've always been in and out of, like, the red. And so I think it's really critical, actually. It's just so critical that we can be able to share these things. Mm-hmm. Anyway.
I'm kind of new to this, and I'm very excited about this group. And actually, this tool looks wonderful. I think it'll become more valuable the more data that gets into it. If it's just a senior project in college, is this the end of it, or will it be continued to expand? The more centers that provide input and the more data points we get, the more we'll be able to help each other. Like you're saying, we'll be able to really. Right now, it's interesting, but I'm not altogether sure how to put our hands. I'm in my low power mode here. How to put out or get our heads around it. What we can do exactly to use it for our centers. So I would like to see if there's some way that this tool can be expanded in any way. Data is power. Can we get ChatGPT to help her? Or any of the new AI tools or whatever.
Hi, it's Nancy at Stella Niagara Center Renewal. I'm sorry I had to step away for a little bit. Will we be receiving a copy of everything that we just saw, plus a copy of the instrument that you developed now, rather than after it's all done?
Yes, Nancy.
Yes to both?
Yes.
Thank you. I was very impressed with what I saw in also as a researcher myself, the research methodology that you used and the intensity with which you've covered the topic. So I appreciate everything you did. And I know, in fact, on behalf of all of us, we're really glad that you've taken this on for us. Thank you.
Also, just a quick side note, we are still working on the example financial report with the categories, so you may not receive that until later, but we will send the Excel file.
Well, I would actually love to have a little bit of something, because we're writing our strategic plan and our annual plan now. Our fiscal year ends August 31st, and there were some things on the slides that I could easily use to improve us right now and not wait for the results. Just
Yeah, you'll definitely get the slides really quickly, and we will try to get the example financial report by next week, hopefully.
thank you, Yumi.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mohan. I'm at Mount Madonna Center in California, and I just wanted to support Nancy's comments. I'd be really interested in some follow-on smaller group discussions around what we are individually doing at our centers, both to test some of those ideas and then also share our experiences.
Also, I see a question about the conclusions at the beginning from Cheryl. Did you mean the financial data conclusions that we made about numbers, or did you mean like the flow chart with all the different best practice ideas? Because we would be happy to go over either again. Also, just thinking about ways that this work can be continued, just kind of going off on that thread. I know that Oren and our professor are very close in terms of like friendship. So it's very possible that this project can expand into future senior projects that can build upon this work that is very common to occur at our university. So maybe that's an option that we can look at, because of course, like Jenna and I and Alyza may be graduating since we're seniors, but next year's class of seniors might be able to take on this work as well.
That's great to hear. Thank you for voicing that.
And just bridging off of what Nancy were saying earlier, like I think just like a huge thanks to RCC for bringing these conversations to life. You know, most of us are probably sitting in a pretty scary seat right now. And, you know, the conversations we've been having even over the last few weeks around, you know, how we are collecting information and really needing to modernize and create efficiencies and share these best practices is, I think, the way that A, we're going to feel not so alone, and B, hopefully be able to take some nuggets forward to help move us into a more positive and sustainable place.
I guess I'd like to ask a quick question of the students. What's your reaction to your accomplishment of this particular project? How did you feel going through it?
It was definitely an interesting problem to solve because all of the retreat centers are so varied that it is so hard to draw conclusions that can apply to all of them accurately. And then so it was very interesting trying to figure out how to get around that and how to separate it out so that it can be as specific as possible for specific problems. Yeah, it was an interesting problem to solve.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Jenna said. It was definitely not an easy task, just like from doing the in-person visits and also collecting and analyzing the data that was shared with us. But I feel like one of the biggest takeaway is like simply just the importance of rest and having this safe space to do that, and just, you know, doing a lot of self-reflection, because, you know, we get very busy with their lives with, school, work, and, other personal matters. But I feel like just learning about what retreat centers do, what you all do for the community, I think it's grounding and humbling. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Absolutely.
it's good.
Absolutely.
Definitely dittoing everything that Alyza and Jenna have been saying. It was definitely tough going through all the data and making sure that everything was like sorted out and in the right place. And it's a very large scope to look at so many different centers and what they do. So that was very tough for us, but in the end, like we really did get through it. And we're excited to give you results from it, because I know that it was hard for all of us in general, including like retreat center leaders as well as us as students, to be doing this work. So yeah, just we're very excited to have done it and to show you. And I did see a question about the manual. We need to have it go through review and approval processes for our school and as well as just for the RCC. Ben, you'll probably be receiving a draft of it soon. And then as soon as it's been approved and we think it's good, we will send it out to everyone. Hopefully, time frame, hopefully beginning 1st or 2nd week of June.
If I may ask a question of the students, what would you have us tell young adults in your age group about the value and opportunities that the centers, at least that you have interacted with, provide for young people? Because one of our concerns is getting the message out to younger generations about these spaces and the flexibility about what they can be and what they can do and how we can serve. Our clientele, for the most part, are aging. And so we have done some of the things that you suggested with high schools and colleges and a senior service group and all of those things. So that's been a wonderful thing. But I'd love to have an insight as to what is this, which is kind of a niche market. When I say the word retreat center to some people, they have no idea what I'm talking about. Impressions would be just appreciated. Thanks.
Not speaking for all of us, but at least in my experience, like with people in school, like a lot of us feel really disconnected with just nature and the earth. Just because so much of we're engineering students, so a lot of our life is very industrialized. We do a lot of manufacturing, things like that, and it's like there's that disconnect between us and like nature and like feeling like connected with that. So that might be something that it may not hit all of us because several people also are not interested in that, but it'll definitely hit a population of folks.
That echoes for some of what I've heard before. So thank you.
Yeah, and then also just like speaking like personally and like what I know about like me and like my friends, right? Like we mentioned before, like the doing like D&D centered things to retreat, like that would bring me in. Like and like bring my friends in, you know? So I think doing kind of maybe almost framing it not so much like, oh, like go here for like mindfulness or whatever, but just be like, oh, like come for fun, parentheses, and mindfulness.
It can also be very modified. Like if you want to teach leadership, D&D is a very good way to teach leadership and creativity. I've played it for several years, so I have a lot of insight on that specifically.
Yeah, sorry, and just adding on to the D&D and other really fun activities. I think mental health is also a very prevalent topic, especially in our age group, but also other age groups as well. But I think retreat centers can definitely play a role in that, as providing a space to whether people my age would be really interested in yoga or meditation, or the programs that Jenna and Yumi have been talking about, like D&D, like those other topics that are like typically mainstream. whether it be like pop culture and things like that. So maybe just adapting to what is going on currently. I feel like that would be nice.
Thank you. That's so helpful. I appreciate it.
Just a quick thought, this can also really I think I interrupted someone, but this can really link in with like looking at corporate, or not even just corporate, but like younger adult who are in the workforce types of things. Because I know that a lot of times it's difficult for you to find space in your missions to accommodate corporate events. But it could even be looking at it from a different mindset of maybe not asking a corporation to work with you, but marketing towards folks that are in corporate environments or in really hustle workforce situations to find space to like rest away from that. Even if it's like just trying to find ways that you can work with your unique mission, but still incorporate marketing towards young college students or young to middle-aged adults in the workforce. Because it's definitely different communities that probably don't know a lot about this and what retreat centers are and what they can do and how much they can utilize it.
I have a question again it's wonderful what you've done, and you're kind of a wealth of information to us, you three who've put this together. If you say your seniors are going on, and if you were the advisors to the next seniors coming in, that they've got the task now of continuing this project, what would you recommend that they undertake for the continuation? What are the main points that you would have them focus on that you feel maybe you could have done better, or you would like to, if you had more time, you'd rather do?
Oh, did you have something? Or I can take a shot. It's a very good question. I think it also came up last week when we presented our project to the Industrial Advisory Board of our department. I think we said that change management was one thing that we would like to, maybe the future group of students would look into, because change is definitely hard, but it also starts maybe with the leaders who can connect deeply to the people who they want to help. Like change management is a very broad topic, but I don't know, Yumi and Jenna, if you have like anything additional to say about change management, because I think that's the first thing that came to the top of my head. Yeah, not saying that you have to change leaders or anything, but helping the leaders make these important changes to adapt to the changing times and prevent from any more deficits.
Yeah, like really this like change management was something that I personally did not learn a lot about it until this academic quarter, which I feel like now knowing more about it, I wish you were able to implement it more. It's essentially just how do you implement change, not how do you do the changes, how that's implemented, how do you work with your employees and your staff and yourself and your boards, and like how does that work for you? Because change is very scary, and I totally acknowledge that. Like change, I'm terrified of change, so I totally get it. And like finding ways to like lessen, like make the blow hit less, or like finding ways to better accommodate or better direct you yourself and the people you work with towards making change to improve your situation, your business model, or just like how you feel about something. Like that's huge.
Yeah, and also like you have like the iceberg, right? The top of the iceberg, the things that you can see at the very bottom, you have like certain mental models that are affecting, the system as a whole. So it really begins with maybe understanding and acknowledging the mental models that we're so used to, and maybe getting feedback from the people around us who can possibly help make better improvements, whether it be operational, financial, things like that.
Also, I know that we looked at this from a very systems-based approach, a very like engineering approach, I guess is what a lot of people would call it. And like a lot of the work here is very not engineering ER systems based, while it can be applied to it. So like a lot of challenges that we had was like finding ways that we could work with your missions, like incorporate the qualitative things like religion, things like healing and values and these very important things. And that was a big challenge for us. That's definitely something we would have to like pass on to the next group of like, this is more than just like your typical industrial engineering, manufacturing engineering project. There's so much more involved here.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, it's messier. Thank you.
But in a good way, messier.
Jenna.
I see we're at the end of our time together, and it's a very sweet spot that we're ending on. I want to express my gratitude to the students. Thank you so much for this presentation and for this time that we've had together today. It's been really, really informative, insightful. Appreciate the care and attention that you gave to this project, the heart you put into it. Thank you everyone for being here, for joining us for this community call. So glad we got it recorded. You'll be able to check the recording in the blog post next week when that goes up. And I look forward to seeing everyone at our next community call on June 13th. It'll be a racial healing workshop with Michelle Cassandra Johnson, an author who'll be working on dreaming practices. Thank you. Thank you. Good to see you all.